Hi everyone, welcome to the Movie Section Show. My name is Fariba, and today I want to give you my review on The Marvels. Now, I actually saw the movie a couple days ago. I saw on the same night that Loki Season 2 finale had dropped. I want to prioritize Loki a little bit because that was a bit more immediate to my attention, but having had a chance to, digest the movie, kind of think about it, I think I'm ready to now talk about it. So before the movie came out, of course, there were definitely a lot of trepidations going into this movie. There was already a lot of bad signs for how this movie is going to turn out. One, we had the Variety article where they had mentioned the test screenings and how they had some quote-unquote middling reviews, so not a great sign right there. Then the big red flag was the fact that the review embargo did not lift until the day before the movie's release. That's usually a bad sign when a movie, a set of reviews don't drop until the day before the movie, because that's typically, that's typically a sign that the reviews are going to be tending towards negative or super negative. Now, of course, it was not as bad as I expected it to be, because the Rotten Tomatoes score ended up being 55%, which is actually not as bad, as you would think. But in terms of Marvel standards, of course, it's not the greatest. So there was a lot of, concerns going to this movie. I did not have a lot of expectations for it. I'd actually go into the film with low expectations, but I was going to see it regardless, right? Having now seen it myself, I will say this. I enjoyed The Marvels. I had a lot of fun watching it. That is not to say that this movie is perfect, especially not in Marvel standards. When we compare it to some of the greatest MCU masterpieces, it's definitely not the most perfect movie out there. There are definitely some clear flaws. But overall, I had a lot of fun watching it with my two buddies, one who has been caught up with MCU and another who has barely watched any MCU movies, which I feel like it had some importance why I had to mention it. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun watching it, and here are the reasons why. The first reason is because of how they really explored the dynamic between the trio. So Monica, Carol, and Kamala. I love how they really explore their evolving relationship, how things start off very chaotic in the beginning, but then slowly and surely they start to have a bit of an understanding to a point where they really kind of need each other. I love that dynamic that they played out here in this movie. It really works out, showing this really lightheartedness, this tenderness between the characters and how they really need each other to kind of become better versions of themselves. So that was one thing I really enjoyed. The dynamic right there. I mean, it really helped out a lot that the dynamic was really the central point in this movie, because again, this movie is called The Marvels, and therefore the team has to be the central point of this movie. That was one positive right there. Another positive is still kind of highlighting the relationship, but a bit more on this, on the duo side. So the first, of course, is Carol and Monica and how they were going to tackle that. That was one I was a bit concerned about, if whether or not they'll be able to really, dive into what happened to the relationship, because we knew for a fact that, they were pretty close at one point back in the first Captain Marvel movie. But then WandaVision, I believe, had kind of teased that something must have happened between Monica and Carol that really kind of took a more strange route. And we get to learn a little bit more of that. There was actually a bit of this emotional depth to it that I did not expect this movie was going to have a little bit of. And I think it also plays out very well in setting up the end of the movie, because once we get to the end, that, it definitely kind of hits that, wow, like, this is what happened between them, and yet this is how we're feeling, and here's this emotional hit that we get. Now, that's not to say that this movie really dives too deep into the emotional bits. Like, I was not like crying or anything like that. I wish there could have been a bit more of the emotional side to this film, but overall, I think because of the fact that they actually get to sprinkle in a lot of this emotional depth in this movie, I think it works out in exploring a lot of this relationship between Carol and Monica. So love that they kind of actually give us some answers to what's happening between them. Of course, it doesn't end right there. I love the dynamic between Carol and Kamala, having a bit of this mentor-mentee sort of relationship. And again, we know for a fact how much Kamala absolutely idolizes Carol. And the fact that we get to see her finally meet her idol was just a lot of fun bits right there, but also kind of showing kind of this true essence of what's going on, really understanding what it means to meet your idols, and how, when it comes to expectations, right? Like, you kind of have to like keep that, you have to kind of control that a little bit. So I will say I did like the relationship between Kamala and Carol and how, they start to really understand each other. And, it does develop from there, from beginning to the end, of course. There's actually one bit in the beginning where it took some really dark turns because of this scenario that happened with the scrolls. And I'm going to try and keep it spoil free as possible. But something does happen with this sequence between the scrolls. And that was definitely one that was like, it took a really deep, dark hit that was just like, oh, wow, this is something that Kamala would have never really, would have anticipated would have been the case. But I think that bringing in Kamala, showing again that dynamic between her and Carol and how, they start to learn a lot from each other. I think I love a lot of that mentor-mentee learning kind of from your I wouldn't say superiors, but learning from your more experienced colleagues. That I love how Kamala was really starting to learn a little bit more as she became more and more of a superhero, because she's still pretty much a young superhero by the time we get to this movie. So love the dynamics here. Of course, a big standout is Kamaa Khan. She's a lot of fun to watch. She definitely brings out that Peter Parker nature to this movie, which is bringing in that youthfulness, bringing in that experience, sort of personality, bring in that energy, bring in a lot of, this excitement that this movie really needed. It's definitely a huge change of pace that we kind of needed for the MCU, because I think almost all of this year, everything has been really much in a serious tone. Like we saw that with Quantumania, we saw that with Loki, we saw that with Secret Invasion. So heck, we even saw that with Guardians of the Galaxy. So the fact that because this movie was definitely kind of trending towards being a bit more upbeat, a bit more energetic, a bit more bombastic. A lot of that energy comes from Kamala, who is a lot of fun in this movie, and not just her, right? I think her family, who does appear in this film, brings in a lot of that energy too. A lot of great fun sequences that we see with them, and a lot of that humor that we kind of needed. I had a lot of, there was a lot of places where I was laughing a lot. So love that energy. She's amazing to watch. I love Iman Vellani as Kamala Khan. She once again is just a star when it comes to playing Miss Marvel. We saw that back last year in her show. We see that again here. She's definitely a huge standout in this movie. So again, another shout out to her. Of course, I don't want to stop there. Of course, aside from the dynamic, aside from the performances, the performance by all the cast members is great, by the way. I mean, in this one, we do see Brie Larson in a much different light and much different portrayal as Carol Danvers. And it says a lot, because I know there's a lot of backlash towards Brie Larson, her portrayal as Captain Marvel, how a lot of them, a lot of this is kind of going to, this hate culture towards Captain Marvel. But in this one, I have to say, I think her personality really evolves. For one thing, I feel like she's definitely far more humanistic. She's far more humane, and showing a lot of her vulnerabilities this time around in comparison to Captain Marvel. And even in Endgame, I feel like we see a bit more of that vulnerability of who Carol is. So she's someone who's a bit more relatable in this film than we saw ever before, which is wow, a huge change of pace when it comes to Carol Danvers. So another thing I wanted to mention right there. Now, having said about the performances and the characters and the dynamic, I also want to emphasize the visual effects in this movie. A huge improvement for Marvel, especially since post Endgame. Huge improvement. I feel like a lot of the visual effects, a lot of the action sequences, which are great, by the way, but a lot of the action sequences, the visuals, the powers, everything's looked far more complete, especially when you compare it towards the trailers. I feel like the trailers were not completed yet, but in this one, everything looked really, fresh, and everything kind of flowed very well. I think the visual effects really work out great in this movie. I think some of the great examples that show that, the actual visuals were spectacular were whenever the actual characters manifested their powers. So of course, the one thing that that really kind of stood out was Photon's powers, or Monica's powers. Because of the fact that she is able to travel in between matter, or that she's able to manipulate matter, just seeing the sequences where she is able to manifest her powers were really some of the coolest scenes that we see in this movie. And it doesn't just end there, of course. When it comes to some of the action sequences, especially at the end, how they're all, using their powers together and how they're sharing their powers. I mean, it's just great. I think the visual effects really work out. I think having that 4-month delay that they needed to polish out the visuals and the visual effects, I think it paid off. So compliments to the visual effects, dynamic, and all that sort of stuff. So let's jump into kind of what I felt were the big flaws. One was the story. The story is a bit messy, of course. you kind of start off things really chaotic, very serious. The middle part goes a bit more in the fun route, and then of course the ending part goes in the more emotional route. So that's typically fine. I just wish that they could have explored a little bit more of the main stuff that was going on. So like the Hela stuff and Dar-Ben. I think a lot of that backstory and understanding what was going on kind of was, explored way too quickly. I think that those sequences, I think having now seen this, I think this movie could have benefited from maybe one extra movie before it to, kind of address what happened in between, Captain Marvel and the Marvels, because unlike Monica and Kamaa Khan, where we actually knew where their story was kind of taking forward, because their stories were a lot more recent and much more relevant now. With Carol, we don't really know what happened to her post Captain Marvel, right? There's this 30-year gap between that and now that I feel like we just don't know what happened. And in this movie, they address it, but they address it way too quickly. I think they're only addressed more so in flashback sequences. And I wish they could have taken maybe an extra movie to explore kind of the consequences of her actions in between, Captain Marvel and Endgame, to allow us to understand what was going on. Because as a result of that, it also kind of diminished the villain in this movie. So the villain in this movie, of course, is Dar-Ben, played by Zaw Ashton. And you get this idea of, she is a villain, of course, but she's not someone who wants world domination or anything like that. She's not like, her typical villains. She definitely has her purpose. She definitely has her actual motives as to why she is doing the things that she wants to do. And you do see a bit of this grayness that they hint here and there. And I wish they could have explored a bit more of that complex backstory with her character. But at the end of the day, like, despite having these flashback sequences, despite her giving her, her backstory and narrating what kind of happened between then and now, I just never really felt for the villain. You just never really kind of had this, the sympathy for the villain. I think that's where it ends up becoming the problem here, is that because they don't actually address, or at least take a bit time to kind of address those bits and pieces of these details, that the actual villain itself kind of felt really underwhelming with what was really explored. So again, some issues were like the messy storylines, the portrayal of the villain, the pacing, because of the fact that they didn't take the time to really focus on the story, because the story itself was really messy, and because of the fact that the villain was not really kind of explored, wasn't as well explored, that the pacing kind of was a bit meh. Because again, this movie's only an hour and 45 minutes, so in one sense, it's great because the movie kind of worked out, moved forward very fast. Nothing felt too long. It actually allowed a lot of the action sequences to go by really fast. I think those are some things that really kind of worked out in pacing. But at the same time, again, because the pacing was so fast that it doesn't take time to focus on some of the relevant bits on the details, the backstory, and all that sort of stuff. So, I think, again, even though there are some flaws to this movie, it doesn't take away the fact that overall I still enjoyed it, because again, I think it definitely gives us this really fun story, how you have a whole trio coming together to, stop this villain who is about to really kind of induce some really, horrible things across the not across the nation, but across the universe. So again, overall, I think I will say that I enjoyed it. It was really fun to watch. I think even again, with the flaws, things turned out really well. Overall, I enjoyed it. I definitely got a little bit of that emotional depth here and there. Like, there were like inklings of that, but yeah, I think there are definitely areas where it could have improved if they took in a bit more time to focus on the story, and that would have at least enhanced a little bit of some of the other things. But that's the story that we got, right? This is what we got as a Marvel movie. Of course, I want to address a little bit about the big sequences that have happened. There's one that's right before the right before the mid-credit scene, and one after the mid-credit scene. So definitely a lot of discussions are going to happen because of those two sequences. I think a lot of people are already talking about it. I'm not going to address the one before the mid-credit scene, but I will address a little bit of the mid-credit scene after. So, some really big, revelations with that. Some really excited things. I, for one, was super excited to see kind of the revelations of where this MCU, where the Marvel Cinematic Universe could go. It definitely kind of teasing a little bit more of what we anticipate Secret Wars is going to be, which is great because I think the fact that this movie kind of tackles a little bit of the Secret Wars connection is a really big improvement. We're finally kind of moving forward somewhere. Again, it doesn't go too deep into it. Again, a lot of the things don't even get addressed until like kind of at the end, or at least not addressed, but tease a little bit. But yeah, the mid-credit scene is going to have people talking for sure. I was excited about it. My friend who has never watched a Marvel movie was really intrigued how everyone was reacting to it. But I would love to talk about it a different time because I do want to keep this as a non-spoiler review. So, but yeah. Overall, I think that basically says everything I have to say about this film. It does make me, sad that this movie is not getting, a chance from a lot of people who usually would typically see a Marvel movie. A lot of people already kind of just, have already made up their minds about the film itself and have not checked it out. And it's really disappointing because, the movie's not as bad as, a lot of critics were trying to, say it was going to be. I think a lot of it was taken out of proportion. The drama was taken out of proportion. The actual movie itself is not as bad as people are trying to say it is. And it sucks having to hear kind of the fact that this movie is going to be a box office bomb. Not even a flop, not even a disaster, but a flop because, yeah, of course, the box office numbers have came out. And it's even far worse than how it's projected to be. So it's unfortunate. I wish this movie did not have to endure these consequences. I think this movie's far better than Quantumania. There's no denying it. This movie's far better than Quantumania. Even better than what we saw with Secret Invasion. I think it's one of the better MCU movies I've seen this year post Endgame. I wouldn't say it's at the top, of course, but definitely better. And I think that's really the sucky part because this movie is really fun to watch. This movie has a lot of things that really work out very well. A lot of the people who hate Brie Larson, a lot of people who hate Captain Marvel, are missing out on the fact that this movie really redeems who Carol Danvers is as a character, really showing her vulnerabilities and her, vulnerable side that I feel like they're missing out on. And again, I hope that, despite the fact that this movie is enduring a lot of big hits right now, not a really good way, that, whatever does transpire here will still at least evolve where the Marvel Cinematic Universe will go. So things like Carol becoming a big leader in the Avengers, or Kamaa Khan becoming a very big asset for the Avengers, or a big asset when it comes to the superhero world, as well as Monica, who could be very essential in really setting up a Secret Wars connection. So, but yeah, if you have not seen this movie because of all those reviews, I actually would recommend you check it out. Make up your own mind. See it for yourself. Make up and see if you feel like you may have enjoyed this, and maybe you can give your thoughts about it. Because honestly, I feel like the reviews itself are really taken out of proportion here. I think it's not as terrible as they're trying to, set itself to be. Yeah, if you have seen this movie though, what are your thoughts having now watched it? Do you think it's as bad as, some of the reviews are implying it to be? Or do you think it's far better than what you anticipated? What are some of your favorite scenes having now watched this movie? Like, what do you think about the chemistry? What do you think about the dynamic? What do you think about the portrayal of Carol Danvers post Endgame? What are your favorite sequences here? What do you look forward to seeing now that we've seen what the ending itself has been, as well as the mid-credit scenes? What do you think about this movie becoming a big push into going into the Secret Wars storyline? And let me know if you have any other thoughts about having now watched the Marvels. Let me know your thoughts below and make sure to like and subscribe.